Hello, and thank you for connecting with the Family of Faith, where we grow, serve, and care. We're excited about the word that we will be receiving today. Always remember to be strong and be encouraged. Family of Faith, looking for ways to connect? Here are opportunities to virtually connect with us. We look forward to connecting in person again very soon with you all.
Good evening. Welcome again to another one of our Wednesday night virtual discipleship sessions. We're so glad that you were able to join us. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for stopping by. We want to encourage you to like this video, to share it, to tag a couple people so that we can all kind of come together and become better disciples even through this digital medium. We want to also say thanks again, or to remind those of you that are here with us. I've still got a few books with me in my office. They are available for those who need Sunday school books on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. Feel free to stop by, pick one up. If those times don't work for you for whatever reason, reach out to us via the church. It's just number 318-869-REST, and I can be reached at extension 113. We'll figure something out. We'll make sure that everybody who needs a book gets one. And we also want to encourage those of you to join us if you haven't done so already, or if it's been a couple weeks since you've done so, to join us virtually via Zoom. Fresh meets on Friday nights. Our youth and teens are meeting at 5:30 and 6:30 on Saturday. The adults growing in Christ are meeting on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Our seniors are meeting at noon on Wednesdays. It's a great time of learning. It's a great time of fellowship. It's a great time of coming together. There are a lot of fun and exciting things that are happening, and we've got some fun and exciting things that are happening coming down the pike, especially as it relates to our Vacation Bible School that you will hear about at a later date. But we just kind of wanted to get that out there for you so that you have the information that's coming to you, or so that you know about these things that are available for you already. This week we are continuing our journey down the pathway as we look at wisdom, as we consider the things that God has to say to us in the book of Proverbs concerning wisdom. Last week we looked at Proverbs, the 8th chapter. This week we're going to be looking at Proverbs, the 9th chapter. And again, just for the sake of getting the benefit of getting everyone on the same page, so that we have sort of this clear understanding as we move forward. When we talk about wisdom, wisdom means a lot of things to a lot of people, but here the simple, the most rudimentary definition that we're learning, the most basic kind of working definition that we are using for the course of this, is basically the ability to make the right decisions at the right time. And so Proverbs chapter 9 gives us sort of a very interesting look at wisdom. Some of it contains some things that we've talked about in previous weeks as we sort of wrap up the month of June. Can you believe that this is the last Wednesday in June, that June is just about gone already, even though it seems like the last couple months took forever to kind of trek by and went by at a snail's pace, but here we are kind of rapidly moving through this month. But anyway, there are some things that we see and that we learn that are reiterated for us in this chapter, and then there are some new things that kind of pick up, and they start in the 9th chapter of Proverbs. Verse 1 says, "Wisdom has built her house. She has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city. Let all who are simple come to my house. Let those who have no sense," she says, "come eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways behind and you will live. Walk in the way of insight." Verse 8, "Do not rebuke mockers or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise and they will love you. Instruct the wise and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." So again, like I mentioned earlier, we see some of these same things that we've talked about in previous weeks sort of popping up again. We see wisdom being personified, or wisdom being given the characteristics of a person, of an individual, of a human being, because we see that wisdom has built this house. Let's look at this picture that's being created. Wisdom has built this house. That's something that we talked about at the end of last week. Wisdom has built this house that is apparently a very large house, because it has 7 pillars to it, sort of signifying the size of the house itself, signifying how great and how grand of a house this is. Wisdom has built this house. It's a nice house. And then wisdom is hosting this party, this gathering, this feast, this thing that sort of has an open invitation to it. It's almost like a Facebook or an Eventbrite event that just will let anybody who's willing to RSVP to just show up. And then wisdom goes to the highest point in the city. We talked about that in weeks before also, that the highest point in the city talks about or refers to a place where people throughout the city are most likely to be, so that you're in a place that's heavily populated, heavily congregated, so you can reach as many people as possible. And wisdom is consistently crying out, saying, hey, I've made this part, I've got this nice house, I've got this great food here, everything's prepared. The only thing that you have to do is show up. And wisdom just keeps calling, and wisdom just keeps inviting and inviting and inviting and inviting so many people to this party, and just saying, anyone who wants to show up, anyone who wants to partake in it, it's free. Free food is available, and it's free good food. There's a nice atmosphere. It's at a nice venue. It's at my nice house, because you're not always willing to just let anybody walk up into your house, but this is the picture that's being painted to show you just how willing wisdom is to let anyone who's willing to partake come in and be a part. And then there's sort of this shift that happens, right? So there's this invitation that's always kind of going out, and this invitation has been going out throughout the entire book. It's been freely offered. It's been freely extended throughout the entire book. And then we get to verse 8. And that sort of teaches us one of the first things that we kind of learn here, that in spite of how willing we are to offer things, in spite of how willing wisdom here in the text is to offer its value, its insight, its precepts to anyone who will partake, there comes a point when enough basically is enough. In other words, there comes a time when people on an individual and even on a collective basis have to make decisions, where they have to choose, where they have to decide what they're going to do with the invitations that are being extended to them. In other words, if we are in the place of wisdom, right? If that's us, imagine how you would feel if you have extended invitation after invitation and opportunity after opportunity and chance after chance after chance after chance to people, only for them to continually reject them. Because here again, you wouldn't have to invite people to a party if they were already there. You wouldn't have to say, hey, come enjoy it, if they were already enjoying it. You wouldn't have to beg people to participate if they were already participating. And so we learn here that there comes a time where we have to realize that sometimes the rejection that people give us, sometimes that the rejection that people extend isn't about what's being offered to them. It's about their unwillingness to accept it. In other words, people aren't rejecting wisdom in this case because wisdom is bad. Eventually, they come to a point, and we have to come to a point where we realize that they are doing so because despite how great the offering might be, they just don't want it. Jesus says it this way, that we are to not cast our pearls before swine. In other words, there are some things that are valuable, right? There are some things that we have in our possession. There are some teachings and some insight and some knowledge that we have that we can be willing, that we should actually be willing to give to people, that we should be willing to share with those, especially as we learned and as we have grown and as we have become better, that we share those things with other people so that they can learn and that they can have the information, so that they don't always have to go through what we went through to learn what we know, right? So that they have the opportunities to become better without hitting their heads up against some of the things that we've hit our heads up against, the obstacles that we might have faced, or the things that we might have endured if they are avoidable. But eventually there comes a point where you have to realize that the people who know that there are people who, no matter how great the insight is, that there are people who, no matter how good and how deep and how wise and how relevant the information is, no matter how great your offering is, there are some people who simply will not want it. And at that point, it becomes less wise for you to beg for someone to see the value in what you're offering than it is for you to simply just walk away. In other words, you can't make someone see what they are unwilling to see. You can't force someone to see the value in something if they're not willing to see the value in it. It will always be too much for someone for whom it was never going to be enough. And so we learn that eventually people, regardless of the things that are being offered to them, people always have a choice to make. And even as those who are offering things, there comes a point where enough simply becomes enough. In verse 8, it says, "Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning." So the other thing that we learn and that we see from this passage is that we have the ability, we can judge ourselves, or we can tell where we are based on our response to correction. In other words, all of us will have to live with correction. All of us have what are sometimes referred to as growing edges. All of us have areas in our lives where we can improve, where we aren't always necessarily doing the best things the best way. All of us have things about us, no matter how smart we might be, no matter how religious or how pious or how close to God we might be. All of us have these areas, these places where we can grow, where we can get closer to God, where we can become better. And God will often use people to show us these things about ourselves. God will often use people either explicitly through the words of others, where they will outright explicitly say, hey, this is something that you can improve upon. This is an area where you can become stronger. This is a place where you can become better. This is something, a place where you can grow. We all have those people who will either outright tell us, or sometimes for others of us, it might not come through their words. It might just come as we sit and reflect and say, hey, you know what? Maybe the way that this person does it is a better approach for me to take. Maybe the attitude that this person has and the disposition that this person has is a way for me to grow. All of us learn. All of us have areas where we can become sharper, where we need even to be corrected, because as great and as wonderful and as gifted and as talented and as good as we might be as individuals and as people and as human beings, there are some things about us that are not the way that they should be. And the only way that they will get better is if someone points these things out to us and say, hey, this is a place for you to grow. But the measurement of our growth and our ability to practice wisdom isn't in a lack of areas where we can grow. In other words, we're not wise because we don't have any more places where we can improve. We are not wise, or we are not to consider ourselves wise when we have no other places where we can get better, where we have no other places where we can correct ourselves or even be corrected. But we are considered wise when, in the face of correction, we take the ability, we have the ability rather, to take what is being said to us and apply it in our lives in such a way that we become better people for it. In other words, we're willing and we're able to hear that there are areas of growth for us, and upon examination of those comments and upon examination of the correction that's being offered to it, we're able to take it and then use it to make ourselves better. In other words, we are not people, it's not that we don't have any growth to do, is that we aren't people who can't be told anything. We aren't people that can't be told that we can't grow. We aren't people that can't learn, because even as we learn, we do always, examine the source. Because there are some people that we are more ready to receive information from. There are some people that, because of our relationship with them, we are in a space where we can more readily receive the correction that they would give, just because we value their opinion and we value who they are and we value who they are to us. But even when it comes in places and from sources that are not ideal for us, we have the ability to take and to listen and to gather the things that they are saying to us and say, hey, even though I might not necessarily like the person that said it, or I might not necessarily like the way that it was said, this is something about me that can be made better. And when we cross that threshold, when we cross that line from being in a place where we are automatically putting up walls about the things that people are telling us, where we are automatically putting up walls and our defenses are up, and we automatically go into this mode where we defend the choices that we made, or we defend our statements, or we defend our attitudes, rather than hearing about how they can get better. When we cross that threshold and we lay our defenses down and we're able to apply the things that are being said and hear them and hear where they're coming from, and then apply them to our lives so that we can correct them and we can become more mature and we can become grow spiritually, that's when we've crossed the line we've crossed the line into being wise, because we're able to judge ourselves based on how we receive correction from other people. So verse 13 says, Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point in the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. For those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. So chapter 9 also introduces us to this new character, if you will, this new sort of personification. We see Folly as being introduced as a woman also, but she is a woman who moves in an opposite way, or in a contradictory way to the woman wisdom that we've been introduced to and that we've been talking about in all of our other time together. And what's interesting is that the same way that wisdom is making herself accessible to everyone and inviting everyone to her feast, the writer here uses that same sort of language to characterize how Folly is making herself accessible to everyone else. And the same way that wisdom is at the highest point of the street, the highest point of the city rather, calling out to everyone, we see Folly calling out to everyone from the highest point of the city, because they're both sort of competing. And one of the things that this sort of says to us, at least on the periphery, is that we always sort of have a choice to make, right? That our hands are never really fully tied, that we always have a decision to make between whether or not we'll operate in the ways that are best for us or in the ways that are worse for us. This is sort of the internal war that Paul is describing that happens in Romans chapter 7, when he says that there's this sort of struggle happening where there's good that I would do, and every time I want to do good, evil is always present. And and vice versa, right? That there's always this sort of tension that happens underneath the skin for us. There's tension that happens internally where we have to decide which way to go. But Folly is inviting everyone. And the other thing that we learn here is that not everything that is good or that looks good to us is good for us. Folly, look at even though they are both clamoring for the attention of people, even though they are both calling out for anyone who will pass by, there's still a subtle contradiction here between wisdom and folly. If you look at, for instance, the type of food that wisdom is offering at its table, at its banquet. Wisdom says, I've got full food and I've got wine there. That wine is not a wine that will necessarily get one intoxicated or get one drunk. That wine is there is just symbolic of the niceness of the function, the niceness of the event that is being held there. Because wine back then was a common drink. It was almost, in some regards, kind of like sweet tea or like any of the other things that we just kind of commonly drink here. It wasn't something that you pulled out for the sake of inebriation. It was just a drink to go with the meal. But it's mentioned there to show the fullness and the vastness of the meal that's being offered. Whereas Folly says, hey, come to my house, come to my crib. We may have like some chips in the back for you, or we may have like a bowl of pretzels or M&Ms, or we may have something that is sweet to you, but that ultimately does not fill you up. This kind of harkens to what we talked about last week, where we talked about how wisdom sometimes offers benefits that are long lasting. And that's interesting because we certainly live in a day of instant gratification, right? We like our Wi-Fi to be fast. We like everything to happen fast. We can't stand one of the things about the pandemic and how it's affected all of us is because whenever we decided to stop for food, especially up until a few weeks ago, we couldn't go inside, so we had to go in the drive-thru. But because everybody had to go in the drive-thru, we had to wait a little longer. And waiting is anathema to us. Waiting is a cursed term. We don't like waiting because anything that we want and anything that we want to have, we feel like we should and we can have it instantly. We want our internet to be high speed because the minute we click a button, we want to be able to pull it up. We hate losing service on our cell phones, not always because it puts us out of the reach of people, but because sometimes when we don't have service, we can't access the web or our games or anything else that we want to pull up without having to wait for it or without it having to buffer. And we want to watch videos whenever we want to watch them. We don't like waiting. And so we want to have things when we want to have them. And sometimes that becomes one of the greatest tricks that we fall into. That we fall into the rut, or we fall into the trap of instant gratification. That we fall into a trap that says, if I can get what I want when I want it, and I can get what I want right now, then let me have it. And according to this passage, that sometimes the way that happens, that's a decision that's not being led or not being guided by wisdom. That's a decision that's being guided by folly. Because even though there are things that seem sweet, even though there are things that seem as though they would be fulfilling or that satisfy the urge that we have or that scratch that particular itch that we have in the moment, in the long run, it serves to do more damage to us than it does in the present. So, in other words, you can have what you want, but what is the ultimate cost for it? One of the ways we see this is when Jesus was in the wilderness, right? And after he had not eaten for 40 days, the Bible, or after he gets baptized, the Bible says that the Spirit leads Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. And then at the end of the 40 days, Satan comes to him with 3 distinct temptations. And one of them is that we see that Satan says to Jesus, hey, you can have all of the kingdoms of the world, but all you have to do is bow down to me. It's all in my hands anyway. I'll give it all to you if you would just simply bow down to me. And Jesus, as many of us know, so rebukes him and says, it's written that you should worship the Lord only, and him only should you serve. But the main test there is that ultimately, through the resurrection, Jesus was going to have that anyway. And what Satan was offering to Jesus was the temptation of having what you will ultimately get, but getting it in a way that causes no discomfort and getting it in a way that causes instant gratification. And a lot of times we choose that because we think it feels the best for us, and it does in the moment. But there are ultimately ramifications for it that if we are not careful of, and if we are not cognizant of, that will damage us in the long run. And so sometimes, as inconvenient as it is, and sometimes as unpleasant as it is, and sometimes as difficult as it may be for us, we must simply learn to wait. One of my favorite preachers, he's been deceased now for few years at this point, G.E. Patterson, he uses this illustration. He says, a lot of times, especially in the early 2000s and the late 90s, when prosperity teaching and word of faith teaching was sort of beginning to climb in terms of and ascend in terms of popularity, he would say that, no matter how much faith a man and a wife have, if a man and his wife have a baby, and they want to have a healthy baby, it doesn't matter how close to God the husband is. It doesn't matter how close to God the wife is. It doesn't matter how much faith either one of them have. If they want a healthy baby, they have to wait all 9 months. No matter how inconvenient it is, no matter how close to God they might be, they still have to wait, because eventually, no matter how advanced we might be, there are still some things that we must simply learn to wait on God for. But the good news is that we have promises, and David tells us in Psalm 27 that if we wait on the Lord and if we be of good courage, that God will strengthen our hearts. In other words, God will give us what we need while we are waiting. Isaiah said that they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings as eagles, run and not be weary. They'll walk and not faint. So wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he'll strengthen your heart. Thanks again for joining us. Again, stay tuned. We've got some wonderful information coming down the pike that you don't want to miss as it relates to how we'll be doing Vacation Bible School and how we'll be engaging over the summer and even beyond the summer. But we'll see you next week. We pray that you have had a blessed day, a blessed evening, and a blessed week. See you next time. God bless.
Thanks for connecting with Peaceful Rest, the family of faith. We pray that you were blessed. We invite you to sow into our church. You can give electronically, by mail, or you can stop by the church. We look forward to the opportunity to connect again. The family of faith.